Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Scale with Predictable Success. It's Les McEwen here, founder and CEO of Predictable Success. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be with Jason Mitchell, who's not just been a client over some years, but has become a really good friend. He's part of our mastermind group here at Predictable Success. Jason, you're very welcome.
Well, I am. It's a privilege, Les, to be joining you and to be a part of this.
Thanks for making your time available. Jason, just for our listeners, tell them a little bit about your own background, about your organization, which is a wonderful church, LCBC. Tell us a little bit about it and your role there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a part of a church called LCBC Church, and it's an acronym, and so not a lot of churches are named acronyms, but the acronym stands for Lives Changed by Christ. That's LCBC, and I always tell people it's kind of the weirdest name you could possibly think of for a church, because most churches are nouns. You know, it's a place that you go to, so-and-so community church. Ours happens to be an adjective. It's describing a group of people. And yet I actually love that, because I think it's a perfect description of who we are. We're a bunch of people in process. None of us have it figured out, but we're discovering what it means to have a richer life in Christ. And so Lives Changed by Christ. We have 15 different locations across the state of Pennsylvania. We've got a pretty significant online audience and influence as well. And we've got work and projects going on all over the world, across different continents, just trying to be involved in communities and seeing transformation happen in communities, economic stability, health and wellness, nutrition, all of that. And so a lot of incredible work happening here. Now, I've been a part of the church for 18 years. And so my wife, Jenny, and I, we were living down south, and we moved 800 miles away from anyone we had ever known, up to Pennsylvania, which, you know, we thought was just the Rust Belt. We didn't know how beautiful it was up here. But it's been a wild ride for us. And so currently I serve on the strategic leadership team here at the church, and I'm a teaching pastor. And so, communicating to the church, just continuing to, part of what I do is keep our staff in line. We have 250 staff, just over 250 staff. And so part of what I do is just keep us aligned on the mission and what we're supposed to be about, and how we're supposed to keep, and how we can continue to move forward with what we believe is kind of our mission as a church, and to keep our church focused on that as well. And so it's an incredible, just an incredible opportunity. I love every day that we get to do what we get to do here. So.
And we're going to talk mostly about what the impact of the coronavirus has been on the church, not so much spiritually, but from an organizational point of view, and just the mechanics of delivering what you do. But before we get there, just for our listeners, to give them a sort of a sense of relative and comparable size before coronavirus. You remember 53 years ago in March?
Yeah.
What would you have been getting across those 15 locations in terms of weekly attendance?
Yeah, so we would have been averaging anywhere between 16 and 17,000 people on a weekend in physical attendance, and then an additional, at that point, probably about 1,000 to 2,000 online for a particular weekend. And so just under the 20,000, probably around 18,000 mark, pre-COVID, who were engaged. And so our locations, I mentioned a moment ago that we have 15 locations. Our locations are kind of wide ranging in what they look like. So we have some locations that are pretty small and might have 150 people part of them. We've got our largest location has 5,500 people who are typically a part of that on weekends. And so we kind of look at it as our model is, from a franchising perspective, we would probably say we're like a company-owned store model. And so when you think about like a Starbucks, for instance, you've got some that are airport kiosk, and then you've got others that are Barnes and Noble, and then you've got other freestanding stores. And so we've in the same way, we've got some locations that are more like our kiosk and smaller in nature. And then we've got some that are freestanding stores. And the bottom line is that they all offer the same core products and the same offerings. And so that's our hope. It doesn't have to look all the same, but we want someone who comes to any one of our locations to be able to have the same experience at the end of the day.
Right. A recognizable template, if you want to call it that.
Absolutely.
This might sound like a really dumb question, but I've known you long enough to know that you actually do think this way. Um, Running one of your locations has got to be more complicated than running a single Starbucks location, I would imagine. So it's not like the equivalent of having 15 Starbucks stores.
Yeah.
If you were to think of a business in terms of scale, size-wise, what would be a read across? What would be the level of complexity that LCBC is compared to for-profit organizations?
Well, what's interesting is, when you think about what industry a church is in, what industry we're in, I would say we're not in any one particular industry. I feel like we're a sort of a conglomeration of several. I would say there's a part of our church and organization that's the hospitality. It's a service industry.
Right.
You've got a whole separate part of our organization that's an event, completely dedicated to almost an events in the event space. So that's our weekends and our
Right.
production and what we do. And then you've got a component of what we do, I would say that's probably in the education sector, because we're producing content, continually producing content that we're having to deliver. And so from a complexity standpoint, you have all of these different deliverables in every one of those quote unquote industries that we're trying to deliver on.
Right.
And so it is, so as far as a marketplace analogy, I don't know. I mean, those three industries are probably the ones that come to mind the quickest.
Right.
But those are the sort of the cross pollination between all those is really what we're dealing with.
I got it. So, although it's not a read across in terms of deliverability, in terms of services, but it's closer to the complexity of having like a 15 school campus network or a 15
Yeah.
nursing home campus network than a straight retail outlet. I get that.
Yeah.
Share with the listeners a little bit of your own role, Jason, and how that's maybe
Yeah.
evolved since you made that track. And by the way, I totally agree. I've been down to visit you, as you know, and it's
Yeah.
just such a beautiful part of the world. And
It
that was
really is.
a little bit of a surprise to me. I'm afraid it's no insult to our friends, but who of course live there and know it's a wonderful place. But it's a beautiful part. But from when you arrived to now, just tell us a little bit about your leadership path.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I came up here 18 years ago, I was at that point we were obviously nothing like we are now as a church. So we had one church, one site. I mean, having multiple locations couldn't have even been, that wasn't even in our thinking. And we were probably a church of about 1,800 people at that point. So maybe about 1,800 on a weekend, and probably a staff of around 15, 20 people maybe. And so
Right.
I came in as the middle school. I came in to work with students. And so in particular, middle school students. And I was probably 23 years old, maybe just turning 24 or something like that. And didn't know anything, and it felt like at that point, they just took a huge risk on me. And I was so grateful, still am today. And as our organization has grown, it's always interesting to me because I always feel like if I were trying to get a job here today, there's no way I probably would. You know how sometimes when your organizations, you grow with it.
Right.
And that's definitely how it's happened for all of us. And we find ourselves sitting there going, man, we've just kind of grown with this thing.
Right.
And so as I've grown with it, my influence and opportunities continue to expand. And so then I moved from just middle school to overseeing middle school and high school, kind of all of our students. And then when we went multi-site, so when we added locations, then it was middle school and high school, not just for one location, but really for multiple locations at that point. And then I moved into a role that was what we would call, it's kind of our next gen. And so that would be anywhere from 5th grade all the way to 29 years old.
Right.
And then we had a little bit of an about face as a church. We had, at this point, we had five locations that we had kind of launched off of existing locations.
I know. Where are we chronologically at this point? What roughly?
As far as so we're right around 2012 at this point.
Okay.
So I had been here right at 10 years at this point. And so we had at this point grown to 5 locations. And things were humming along pretty good. And we had a church outside of the Philadelphia area approach us and say, hey, this is kind of random and this is a flyer. We're sure it probably wouldn't even work, but what if we actually merged with you guys and became an LCBC location? And so what we felt, so it was our first merger opportunity with another church. And this was a large church, pretty significant what they had to offer. I mean, they had 45 acres of incredible property, a building, and most importantly, incredible people outside of Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was a market that we wanted to be in. But if we were just going to keep growing off of each existing location, it was going to take us years to kind of bridge that 85-mile gap, or whatever. So we felt it was an incredible opportunity. And I say all that because that was really where I shifted my attention next. And so I moved out to the Philadelphia area to basically merge that church and bring them on board as LCBC and turn the culture and turn the church there to make them LCBC, which anybody who's gone through merger and acquisitions knows there's significant challenges with that.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and the payoff and the reward is on the other side of that, but boy, it's but you're jumping into the deep end when you do that. Right. Since then, we've actually had 2 further mergers. So we've got out of our 15 locations, 3 have been mergers at this point. So it has been part of our growth.
And the key focus of your role now?
Yeah, so the key focus of my role is, then 2 years ago, we had what I would probably call our most significant restructure at the executive team level that we had probably in about 10 years. And so what we were feeling at that point is we had one executive team that was providing directional oversight for the entire church, which included just the day-to-day operations of the church, but then also expansion opportunities and getting into new markets and mergers, everything that I was just talking about. And as we looked at it, felt like those are probably 2 different functions that if we can almost create 2 executive teams, so to speak, we work together, but have 2 very, very high functioning teams dedicated separately to those. And so we kind of split the executive team into those 2 functions, one being expansion, the other being basically the church, what anybody who comes to LCBC would understand as the church. And so I moved back at that point to lead the team that oversees that church side. And so working with that executive team.
Got it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's always struck me about Jason is the degree to which you are really committed to developing as a leader, and just a degree of intellectual curiosity, but not just for the sake of being intellectually curious. In order to implement things, you're very wide read. When did that start? Have you always been like that, or did you feel challenged that you needed to get better as a leader?
Well, I think I've always had, I remember Les, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I remember being as a kid, 9, 10, 11 years old, and we had a World Book encyclopedia set. And I mean, honestly, I, for hours and hours on end, would flip through those encyclopedias, and I would just learn things about cities and learn things about animals and learn things. I've always loved learning. I've always been naturally curious, and I've always been, I think, extraordinarily pragmatic. And so I'll tell you what I don't like reading. I struggle with reading fiction because I feel like I can't, what's the use? I need it to be useful. And so those two things, I think a natural sort of curiosity and then a passion to see it, implemented, and how does it help, and how does it move things forward? I think those 2 things combined have always just led me to continually want to grow and then apply that to what we're doing and to our best effort and our best work.
That's great. So let's come to the thing that, it's not even an elephant in the room, it's the elephant that's standing on our head. The last, what has it been? Oh, it's April, May. The time of recording, it's coming up to 4 months of this COVID emergency. And then the other things that have just happened around all of that, including the Black Lives Matter movement, that has just turned things upside down. What's the biggest single change for LCBC?
Well, I would say what it's done, Les, is it's fast-tracked things that we had just been thinking about, things that we have, hey, maybe we'll have to pivot to this at some point. Hey, maybe this would be something a year from now. All of that became, and so I'll give you practical examples here in a second, but all of that, the things that maybe we had thought about for future development or maybe opportunities suddenly became, oh, tomorrow we need to be this. We need to pivot. So some good examples of that, I think, would be we had been exploring how to continue to be a church that meets people in an online space, how to be an
Right.
organization that meets our constituents and our people um, through in omni-channel ways, and so that they can interact with our church in whatever ways they deem are most valuable to them, whether that's on site, brick and mortar, or whether that's through online experiences. So these are things we had been talking about, but suddenly we realized we don't have a lot of our core products available in some of those omni-channel formats and available through online experiences. And suddenly what was a 6-month project became a 2-week project, and we were able to get content and able to get environments online very, very quickly. So I would say that that's probably been one of the biggest shifts for us. I'm not sure it was the speed of pivoting. We sensed that we needed to pivot all along, but boy, it just fast-tracked everything.
Right.
And I would say, Les, the gift in all of this has been, I had asked our team to read Cy Wakeman's book, No Ego, back in January. And one of the things that she talks about in the book is there's a difference between, she kind of says that change management's a little bit overrated, and because it takes egos into account. So it's kind of like, how do we help someone get over these things, as opposed to just creating a change ready organization, which is there's always going to be change. And so my point is simply this, I would have said we were a change ready organization before this, but this has absolutely forced our hand, because you literally don't know what's coming 2 weeks from now. And so you cannot, everything we do is planning in pencil so that you can erase it pretty quickly. And so that has been a gift. And right now what we're talking about as an executive team is just are there blank slates in front of us that we need to leverage as we begin to come back, are there basically things that we were doing that were normal before that we shouldn't go back to? Because what was normal then was crazy. We have an opportunity in front of us to change things, and let's not wait on that.
Right. I love that reference to Cy Wakeman's book. I remember you recommending it at one of our mastermind getaways, and it feels to me very much like what she's essentially fleshing out in great detail is what we know as the enterprise commitment. That if you've got people who are genuinely expressing the enterprise commitment, that overrides the personal fear and ego in coping with the result of change management, and get rid of it completely, but it helps a lot. And
let me just say, Les, with that, I mean, I don't think we should pretend that, whether you're in the C-suite or whether you're in a management position, whatever, that those don't affect us either. I mean, we ought to be setting we hopefully are setting the pace for an enterprise commitment. But part of what this season has done for me, I mean, it's challenged. I mean, I don't like the way we're having to work in some way. I've had to communicate differently. I've had to, the whole way that that we're communicating now is different than probably what I would prefer. And so if we're not, I mean, I feel like one of the challenges for us has been, if we're not willing to embrace this, it's certainly not going to make its way down to the rest of the staff who are on the front lines of, doing some of the work that we're doing right now.
Right. One of the things I'd love to hear your view on that I've been talking about a lot recently is that part of what I think we're finding difficult as leaders is the concept that I'm calling leading from 5,000 feet. That we're used to being at 30,000 feet. That's our natural environment. Long horizon, long overview. Planning ahead. Planning the chess moves. And then when this all hit in March, we had to get down to runway level, and where many of us as leaders, good at that too. We can get down when we have to and triage and do the dirty fingernail work. But this point that we're at right now, where we've got as leaders some elevation, but it's only some. We're 5,000 feet. We can't see next year, but we can for the first time maybe see a quarter, 2 quarters. Is that resonating? Is that sort of where you're feeling yourself at the minute?
Absolutely. And I feel a little bit airsick because I feel like we're constantly just bobbing and weaving from 5,000 to 20, to 30,000 to 5 to 30 to 5, depending on the day and depending on the situation. Right. And, I feel like part of the misnomer about management is that we think that all management is micromanagement, and we can tend to think that sometimes. And what management really is aligning the organization. So that's the 5,000 foot level that I feel like we need to provide. That's probably most valuable to the organization, is to make sure that the tactical decisions that are being made are aligned. As long as they're aligned and heading in the right direction, we do need to be involved, and we have had to insert ourselves, I would say, more frequently in the last several months than maybe we have had to in the past. Because the fact that we don't have some of our natural communication lines available to us anymore, because we're not meeting and we haven't been in the offices. Now we replaced those with other mechanisms, but it's still disrupted our natural communication line. So you kind of put that all together, and it's a recipe for potential misalignment. And so I think the way that we have tried to, and I think the thing we have to do is continue to try to make up for the communication disruption by inserting ourselves a little bit more, and probably giving a little bit more directive and clarity around directives than we maybe have in the past.
We'll be right back with Jason in just a moment, when we're going to talk about how to think strategically in a virtual environment, how his organization has pivoted and innovated in response to this current COVID crisis, and we'll talk about what he sees for the future of his church. Now, if like Jason and me, you're an MSc, that's the most senior executive, whether you're the founder or CEO or managing director or lead pastor or madam secretary, whatever the title of the most senior person in your organization, if that's you, then you know one thing for sure. It can be really, really lonely up there. Sure, being the most senior executive is a great privilege, and it brings great responsibility, but it brings great challenges too. And sometimes we just don't have the right forum to go and share those challenges in a way that we feel comfortable and supported, challenged, and held accountable. I'm sure you've got a great team in your organization, a fantastic senior leadership team who support you, but there are times when you're just not ready to share with your senior team just yet. And there are other times when you want to talk with people who have got a different perspective than from the inside of your organization. Sometimes you just don't want to distract your senior leadership team because of some of the other things that you've got going on. And you've almost certainly built a great support group of friends and family. But let's be honest, I know this and you do too. There are many times when you're grappling with a particular challenge, a growth challenge, either around your own leadership or the growth of your organization, and you just don't want to burden your friends or your family. And many times, even if you did, they often can't really help you, and that means they're left feeling frustrated and you're left feeling unfulfilled. And it's because of that challenge, the challenge of it being lonely at the top, and yet I've got big challenges of my own to meet, that I started the Predictable Success Mastermind Group. Jason Mitchell, our guest interviewee today, is a member of the Predictable Success Mastermind Group, along with a group of like-minded growth leaders, just like you. And perhaps the Predictable Success Mastermind Group might be exactly the place to go for the support, accountability, and encouragement you need in these incredibly difficult times. So why not go, take a look, make your own mind up, head over to predictablesuccess.com/mastermind and check it out. And now back to our guest today, Jason Mitchell.
One of the things that I think I'm seeing quite a bit is that in this shift, just to be bluntly tactical about it, where we're all of us spending forever on this thing that you and I are on, Zoom, just so the listeners are aware. Jason and I have got line of sight of each other just so that we can converse naturally. But one of the things that's happening as a result of that is, I believe I'm seeing that what we call vertical alignment, vertical management teams in their silos, that's working out well. You know, we made that change, and Jean can get on to Zoom with her team and can get the punch list done and work things out and work things through. But what's harder is lateral management at a senior level, because quite a bit of that is serendipitous. Quite a bit of that is being able to walk in and out, so to speak, whether it's virtually or physically, and just getting that, you know, where you would stand up and walk down to somebody else's office and say, hey, you got 20 minutes to knock something around. That doesn't feel like it's, you know, it's just as natural or as easy. How are you and your T1 team, you know, compensating for that?
Yeah, I think you're dead on, Les, and I think we have found that to be very true. I actually think we've been more efficient at the tactical levels
Right.
over these last several weeks, because it's just been very boom, 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 get it done. And here's the
Right.
directives and we can move forward. We have what you lose is nuance, and what you
Mm-hmm.
lose is the healthy debate at times. And so how have we made up for that? I mean, honestly, there have been some moments where we just have said, this is a decision or this is a conversation we just all need to meet, and we're going to have to figure out the social distancing thing, but we got to be face to face for this. And
Really?
I think what we found, and this is probably just restating what you said, is that the strategic decisions just weren't working for us on
Mm-hmm.
Zoom.
Yes.
And we needed to find ways to be face to face, even if we were sitting outside, to just have the space to be
Right.
able to nuance the conversation.
Right.
So I very much agree, and we have very much faced that as well.
This is a really dumb. I like to say brilliance is built on the mundane. Well, I'm about to test that very strongly. But one of the things I've been playing with is I can switch the frame of my what I'm looking at here from dark to light. It's a dark black frame or a gray frame. I'd love to be able to pull in some different colors, but what I'm doing is I'm switching the background frame color as to whether it's a tactical meeting or a strategic meeting, just to give me visible reminder, this is a strategic meeting. Don't get tactical, because it feels to me like the virtual tools, the way we are using them at the moment, have a gravitational pull to tactical. And don't ask me why that exactly is, but there's a whole bunch of, I'm sure, heuristic and other reasons why it just pulls us towards the tactical. And I love your idea of, if you can fix it from a social distancing point of view, and that's of course getting a little easier now. Sometimes you just got to get together. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Now, you were on a very specific, conscious, thought through path to predictable success right before this thing hit. I mean, you were working the model, you were making substantial progress. Where do you feel you got just, late February, early March, before this really took effect? And what's been the impact on where you're at in the life cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we, as an organization, over the last 18 months have been really, really working hard to identify where there's complexity within the organization, and to tame that complexity, and to put the right processes in place in order to help us get to predictable success. That has been a value. It's been a calling, it almost feels like, for us. I mean, it's everybody on our staff can tell you about whitewater and what that means. So it's interesting, Les, because we definitely had and have had a lot of momentum going into the spring. In fact, I would say probably 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before we shut down from a COVID standpoint, we had our an all staff meeting. And so 4 times a year, we bring all of our staff, everybody, all 250 janitor. I mean, like from janitors to everybody.
Right.
And we had just had them in and had actually kind of said, here's kind of where we're starting to land. Here's the model as we've worked through all of these projects to identify where there's whitewater and where there's complexity. And it was just making sense. Then COVID hit, and obviously that's not the most, at that point, that's not the most pressing thing in mind. There's a lot more more pressing things to triage,
right.
issues to answer. I think, some of the implications probably would be that we probably fell back to a degree towards some of our whitewater or fun communication lines, and
right.
sort of your stages that you've talked about, and we probably went back to what's most natural. And as far as efficiency, when I say most natural, what's going to deliver the most efficiency? And I actually think there's a season for that, honestly. I mean, we were trying to manage a disruption unlike, none of us have had experience leading through a pandemic,
right.
at least here in our organization. So, and nowhere. And so I think we needed to, in some ways, bypass a few systems, bypass a few processes, in order to get speed to market with decisions.
Right.
So that was a time for that. I think what we're coming to now, though, Les, is now we're actually just, even these last 10 days, 2 weeks, we're having much more concrete conversations now about, okay, it's time. We cannot let that be a pattern now.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
it's time now to go back. And even this coming, at the time that we're doing this right now, even this coming week, I've got plans to review, basically bring back all that work back out for our executive team to review again and to go, okay, it's let's not forget where we've been. It's time now to begin to put our heels in, dig our heels in,
right.
And to move forward. So,
right.
So I would say it definitely, we felt that back and forth, that tension of staying true to the work that we've done and yet responding in the moment to just saying, hey, we've got to make some quick decisions, and that's okay. Giving ourselves the grace in some ways to
absolutely
to manage this.
And I've been saying to people, not only don't feel guilty about it, feel good about it, because it's the right thing to do. I've been telling people quite a lot. If you were on the left growth side of the life cycle before this headwind hit, you're going to be pushed backwards. And the best thing, to where you were before, and the best thing to do is roll with it, be like bamboo, move with the wind.
Yeah.
And then and do the triage work. Go back for a while to the, ready fire mode. But what's really important is that as you get to that 5,000 feet level, as we begin to get some elevation, push back forward again. Don't revert back permanently to those decision-making and execution modes, because it will stunt your growth. So as you begin to get a bit of a we're not talking long-term yet by any stretch of the imagination, but we don't have our nose pressed to just next week anymore. And we're starting to think, medium-term, the impact of all of this. One of the distinctions I've been making is between pivoting, which was important to do on its own right, but which doesn't produce a long-term solution. All it does is give you short-term relief. Some of the pivots will become part of the long-term innovation that will, shape us permanently. And I like to use that analogy, or the quote by Bobby Orr, the ice hockey player, who's just a genius and, most credited ice hockey player ever, I believe. And he was asked about the secret of his success, and he said, well, I skate to where the puck is going to be. Right.
Yes,
and that's what we as leaders are trying to do. We're trying to get our organization to where it needs to be. What are the long preamble to a question? What are the pivots and changes, and maybe even some stuff you haven't done yet, that you think are going to solidify as permanent innovative changes for LCBC moving forward?
Yeah. So, one of the ways that we've been talking about it and starting to feel good, and so this will sound probably just like it'll sound just like it's semantics. It's not, though, and it's a bit of a hyperbolic statement, but it's meant to kind of shift our thinking. And so what we've been saying is, we used to be a church of 15 locations that just happened to have online offerings. Now we're an online church that just happens to have 15 locations.
Right.
And again, it might sound like semantics, but it's actually an incredibly, it's a completely different posture when you begin to think about the things that we do. We have to create ways for people to engage those in whatever way they deem is most valuable to them. And so in the past, it was just kind of by the product offerings that we made, or maybe even by the things that we promoted, all of that, our promotions and marketing. It was obvious that the brick and mortar was the end all. Right. And now we're saying, hey, the end all is you engaging with our church.
Right.
And we're going to provide multiple platforms and multiple ways for you to be able to do that. And so I would say that that's a long-term, that's the future for us. And so then when you begin to play that out practically, that means that all of our ministry environments, or all the offerings, the product offerings we have, they all have to have a SKU that's available online. They all have to be deliverable in those ways. And so that's a pretty significant shift. I would say the other shift that we're making is how we communicate. And so even just down to very practical, I told you a moment ago that we're kind of in the event business as well. And our primary thing is weekends. And in the past, for delivering an online experience, we basically just taped what was going on in the room, or just broadcast, I should say, what was going on in the room.
Right.
That has very much shifted. And so now we're talking very, very specifically to an online audience. That reshapes the way that we do it. That shapes the way that where we're looking. I mean, it comes down to small little tactical things like that. It shapes the things that we're promoting. And so that's a pretty significant shift that we don't see changing. In fact, to be, a very, very real example, a very practical example of that is we're going to continue to film one of our gatherings as a strictly online gathering. And so that means that we'll be talking right to the camera. That means the way our musicians do some things and all that. I mean, like, it's different than if people are in the room. And we're actually now going to open that up to a studio audience. And so if someone wants to make that their church experience, great, they can do that. But just know we're not going to be looking at you. We're going to be looking at the camera. And so we're just playing, we're experimenting. The one thing we know we're not going to go back to, though, is just filming what was happening in the room and just hope that it makes sense for an online audience. We're going to film for an online audience, and deliver that.
And when you think about it, of course, it makes so much sense. And if in fact there'd been no COVID and we all sat down and tried to think through the impact of online, we would have gotten there anyway. It would have just taken a lot longer. I know you've always been hot on metrics. Are you having to come up with some new metrics to, gauge engagement and from your congregation, from your members?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've and we still haven't landed the plane on this one, but we've really, especially early on through the COVID season, just said, how do we tell that our people are still engaged with our church? How do we know people are still? How do we measure this? And so we've actually had 3 different models that are formulas that are running. And so we've been evaluating each of the 3 side by side to kind of just tell which one really does tell the most accurate story on this.
Right.
And, or what we feel is the most valuable, I guess, story. And when I say valuable, I don't mean it paints a narrative that we just want people to know. It's more valuable for our end to be able to follow up on and to deliver on the things that we say as a church we want to deliver on. Right. So yeah, it's changed. It's changed the way that we're trying to measure. Is it just views or is it 30-minute views? Part of our approach has been we want to actually take probably. So our philosophy is the absolute most conservative approach to viewership that we can possibly take, because then we kind of know with integrity we can say those numbers, and if anything, it's more than that as opposed to inflating. And if anything, it's a lot lower than that. And so there's a lot of different approaches, a lot of different ways that people can go about it. But the other thing, Les, is we are shifting, at least for churches. I don't know how it is. I mean, every organization has their kind of their metrics that rise to the top. For churches, it tends to be attendance, as in butts in seat, right? Mm-hmm. Like that tends to be the thing at the end of the day, just how many people were there. And that is a good metric and it tells you something. But in the new world, where people can engage with your brand, engage with your church in whatever way they deem most valuable, that cannot be the only way of telling anymore that someone's engaged. Target could care less whether someone buys their product in the store or online. At the end of the day, it's a sell. A sell is a sell is a sell. So for us, we're sitting there going, what's engagement look like no matter how they do it? And so we've kind of said, look, we want people engaged in our weekend gathering, which can happen in brick and mortar or online. Doesn't matter how they choose to do it. That's engagement. We want people engaged in a connection to a relationship connection to someone in our church. Again, that can be through a digital or online group or an in-person group. At the end of the day, we're okay with either one. We want people serving. We can measure that in different ways. We want people investing in their communities, and we want people living generous lives. And so all of those, we have now said, hey, we want specific metrics to be able to determine. And then let's say someone who's doing all 5 of those, or someone who's doing 2 of those 5, or someone who's doing 1 of those 5, what does that say? And how do we help someone move from 1 to 2 of those 5, from 2 to 3 of those 5? And so that's really where our headspace is right now in thinking about how to move engagement, not just attendance. That's a really important distinction for us.
Absolutely.
How do we drive engagement, not attendance?
The 2 great things just came out of what you said. One of them is that point that you just made, and I see a lot of churches are going to have to work really hard not to fall into an error that those of us who were in internet marketing way back fell into a long time ago, which was, got to build my list, got to build my list. I've got 100,000 people on my mailing list, got 1 million people on my mailing list. I've got a great list. All that means it's just numbers, right? So I hit send, and this weekend, 40,000 people will hear that this podcast is available. That is no relevance to the actual engagement at the other end, the number of people who even see it, because it goes into their spam folder, see it and care, see it and open it and act on it, listen to the podcast and learn something from it. It's a long way from that big metric of 40,000 people on my mailing list to really making a change. And I came across the concept many years ago of 1,000 raving fans, and I'd rather have 1,000 raving fans than a mailing list of 100,000. I mean, there's a guy, I follow his stuff. He released a course yesterday on a topic. It was $197. I didn't even read his sales page. I just hit the button, bought it, because I know everything that he does is world class, and I want 1,000 raving fans like that. The other thing that you just mentioned on the way through, which I think is very appropriate to every organization, any shape or size at the moment, for profit or not for profit. You talked about, if I heard you right, that you're testing out at the same time 3 different ways of measuring stuff. And this is the time for sequential testing. This is not for the time for testing. It's time for testing in parallel, not testing in series. Don't try this and then suck up the results and analyze it, then try the next thing and then do all of that, then try the next thing. This is not quite throwing spaghetti against the wall, but one way I'm phrasing it is scrappy is the current normal. Get out there and test it with the minimal action steps between you and actually getting it out there and live, and test a lot of stuff. Have 7 things, 9 things going, and find 2 to 3 that are really going to make a difference. But the old method of, research, analyze, it isn't going to work, because all available data is irrelevant right now, right? There's no current data to help you. There's no, historic data to help you. There's only current data. That's all that will help you. So it's great to hear that you're doing those sequential testings. Final aspect on all of this, Jason, what's still, just really got you gripped that you have, LCBC, you haven't got it yet, you still really need to respond in some way to something that's happened over the past period of time? Where would you still be gathering your resources and taking another charge?
Oh man. Well, I mean, are you talking like kind of cultural moments, or are you talking about just everything that's happened, or are you talking about organizationally at this point?
Just whatever comes to mind. Whenever, where at the moment do you still get a little bit of a heart sink and think, we gotta up our game there?
Yeah. Well, these are incredibly challenging times culturally for us. People are living with a lot of anxiety. They're people that are living with a lot of frustration, fear, and so if COVID wasn't enough, obviously, then you throw on some of the stuff that's some of the racial stuff that's been, again, in our nation's history, brought back to the surface in new and fresh ways, that old wound. And the church, for us in our particular context, that's exactly the kinds of things we want to be able to add value into people's lives about, to answer questions. And, Les, I mean, it's as far as us not getting it, or maybe the challenge right now, it's actually more just the tone of the culture, which is so divided. And the cancel culture stuff is the bad part about cancel culture is that there's no room anymore. There's no room to be wrong on anything. There's no room for conversation. There's no room to just, I flubbed it. I just said the wrong thing by accident.
Right.
And without it being, pretty blown up into an incredibly significant issue. The church and what we're trying to do right now, we've got to model what it means to speak with grace and with truth. And I think both of those things together are a powerful force in our culture. For anyone listening right now, the people in your life that have probably most influenced you in a positive direction, I promise you, if you think about them long enough, at some point they have had a conversation that was full of grace, and they've probably had a conversation that's full of truth at some point too. And that's why they influenced you, and that's why you probably love them. And right now, we are positioned as a church. We have to position ourselves to be able to speak with grace and truth. in a world that is increasingly what feels like more hostile. And so I know that's not organizational, Les, and I'm sorry that's a different
right
direction.
That's right on the button, man. It really is.
But
Thank you so much for
that's
sharing.
where our hearts and heads are right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, God bless you for doing it. And it's been a pleasure watching you develop and cope with all of the complexities of what really is I know you believe it to be a privilege of a role, and it truly is. And it's been a privilege to watch you do it. I'm pretty sure that sometime, hopefully about this time next year, we'll be doing a series on, okay, you know, where are we now? The tide's gone out, come back in again, now what? So I hope you'll come back and tell us how things have been going with LCBC. But in the meantime, thank you for your time today, Jason.
Thank you, Les. Very grateful for you and the work that you're doing.